in years when there wasn't sufficient funds to support the Prop 98 allocation. There's also Senate Bill 858, which is the education trailer bill, which required some reserve limitations, which would become in effect in fiscal year 2015-16 as well. So if a district adopts a budget with a combined assigned and unassigned any fund balance in excess of the state minimum, which for our district is 3%, the district would have to identify the following. So we would have to identify the minimum reserve level. We'd have to identify the amount in excess of that minimum above the 3%. And we'd have to prepare a statement that substantiates the need for that. Examples of the needs are listed in the last bullet on the slide. So there is a trigger which could affect the district reserve cap, which is part of Senate Bill 858 and Proposition 2. So there could be a hard cap that would be imposed on school districts if certain conditions are met. And in that case, school districts would be required to cut their reserves to no more than twice the minimum reserve, and for OUSD that would be 6%. In order for that cap to be implemented, the following conditions would have to be met, and that includes Proposition 98 maintenance factor being fully repaid. Prop 98 must be funded under Test 1. The Prop 98 dollars would be sufficient to cover both growth and the statutory COLA, and a deposit must be made into the Prop 98 reserve. The governor's budget for 2015-16 did not anticipate this situation to occur prior to 2018-19. However, there is some speculation that by School Services of California that it would actually be triggered sooner than that. So when we look at the local control funding formula for the 15-16 year, as I said, the governor proposed increasing the budget by $4 billion. The new funding would close the gap by approximately 32.19%. And when combined with the original year of 13-14 and the current fiscal year, the gap closure would be a little over 58%. In 2015-16, the average school district increase would be 8.7% or $675 per ADA. However, for OUSD, it's equivalent to approximately 5.89% or $377 per ADA. When we look at what what the local control funding formula factors would look like at target, which is the year 2020-21, when we increase the base grant amounts by the 1.58% COLA, these are the grade span amounts per grade level. So just to show you, so wherever you see kindergarten, it actually includes transitional kindergarten as well. So for grade level TK through 3, the base grant amount for 15-16 would be $71.22, and this is at full implementation. And then grades 4-6 would be $72.28, and grades 7-8 would be $74.44. The grade span adjustment, which is our class size reduction, would also be increased by the 1.58% COLA in the 2015-16 year, which would make the target funding for class size reduction, which is a ratio of 24-1, it would be $741 per average daily attendance for grades TK through 3. It just is important to note that our previous class size reduction funding was $1,071 per enrollment, not per ADA. And this is our grade span adjustment at full implementation year, fiscal year 2020-21. So we're receiving about 58% of this figure in the current budget year, or in budget year 2015-16. So when we look at our target amount as calculated under the 2015-16 budget parameters, our target amount would look like this. For TK through 3, we're estimating our ADA to be a little over 1,058 students, and grades 4 through 6 a little over 830, and 7-8 a little over 587. So when we take our total ADA projected estimate, and this is actually what our P2 or our second principal ADA amount it would be for the current year. We're using that to estimate our funding for next year. We would take that times the base amount and the grade span adjustment. The supplemental amount that we receive is based on our students who qualify as English language learners, foster youth, and those that qualify for free and reduced lunch. So this would be the amount of our new target amount. In doing the calculation for our funding, we take the new target amount from the previous slide, subtract out what our funding is in the current year to get our gap percentage for the 2015-16 year. We multiply that by the gap percentage, which the governor has estimated to be 32.19%. So that comes up to be a little under $1 million. We add that to our previous year funding, so it's this number plus that number to get our $16,781,006, or an average per student amount of $67.74, which is an increase of $377 per ADA, or an increase of 5.89%.
That's amazing.
To that.
So impressed. She goes out.
In addition to the LCFF, there was some talk in the governor's budget about CalSTARS and CalPERS. The governor is not addressing any of the increased costs associated with either of these retirement contributions. So just to reiterate, the CalSTARS, which is our state teachers retirement system, is projected to increase from 2013 a percentage of 8.25% to over 19% in the year 2020-21. And CalPERS, which is our classified retirement system, is also projected to increase from 2013-14 from a little over 11.4% to over 20.4%. So as I said, the governor's state budget does not address any of these cost increases. As an illustration, this shows the year-over-year percentage increase that has been authorized by the governor on the CalSTARS piece. And the CalPERS piece, these are projected amounts in the years 2015-16 through 2021. So these numbers are small, I apologize for that, but this is just showing the impact of those percentage increases over the time period from the current fiscal year through the year 2020-21. The amounts that are projected for the salaries here, this is what we currently have budgeted for our salaries, and it's estimating just a 2%, which is our average step-in column moving across those fiscal years. These are the percentages of the projected STRS and PERS rates as you go across, and this would be the contribution amount. The totals that are included in this section include the difference from what both the STRS and PERS rates were in 2013-14. So you can see cumulatively, year over year, what the increased cost in both of those retirement systems over that 8-year period or 7-year period. The amount down on the bottom shows year by year how much additionally each of those increases in the retirement systems cost. So it's the same amount as up here, only this is cumulative and this is not. So just to kind of show you what the impact of the CalSTRS and PERS rate increases are over that same time period that we're looking at the full implementation of the local control funding formula. So on to some good news. There were some discretionary funds that were included in the governor's budget, as I mentioned previously, $1.8 billion of one-time money. The estimated allocation is $180 per average daily attendance, and for Orinda it would be around $445,000. The governor has recommended or suggested that those monies be used to fully implement or to assist in the implementation of Common Core, and also to look at the newly adopted English language or development and the California Next Generation Science Standards as well. There was a small grant in the current year that was earmarked similarly. For special education, they would be subject to the 1.58% COLA. So when we look at what that increase would be for Orinda, it's just a little over $20,000. When we look at the other state areas, the Lottery Commission won't come out with their projections until the end of June. So we would be using the rates that we currently are using for the 2014-15 year. The unrestricted lottery is estimated to be $128 per average daily attendance, or I'm sorry, I missed a zero there, $315,000. The restricted portion of lottery, we received 2 different portions of lottery, is estimated to be $34 per average daily attendance, or $84,000 for OUSD. We are, or the governor is again supporting the mandated cost block grant, and so he is estimating that to be $28 per average daily attendance, or for OUSD that would be $69,000 for the 2015-16 fiscal year. So what's not in the state budget, there's no funding currently for any statewide facility bonds, so there's no new construction grant bond money or anything associated with facilities at this point. And as I said, there's no money to address the increased costs in the CalSTRS or CalPERS retirement rates. When we look at our multi-year projections, because when we look at the budget, we have to look at budget year plus 2 subsequent years. This is an illustration of our progress towards full implementation of the local control funding formula. And this shows a comparison of the projected average daily attendance amount under the local control funding formula. And for the 2015-16 and 16-17 years, those are estimates based on our estimated enrollment, our unduplicated count, and the gap percentage that's being recommended by the State Department of Ed. So for next steps, after this presentation, the board's going to look at the board budget guidelines for the 2015-16 year, and we'll continue with our budget development. Our fiscal advisory committee met last week, and they will continue to meet. In March, the second period interim report will be presented to the board, and in that presentation, the projections for the multi-years would include the first look at the 2015-16 projections based on staffing and the governor's budget. The board would also be looking at enrollment projections and budget assumptions. The budget development process will continue, and the fiscal advisory committee will continue to meet. In April, enrollment projections will come to the board, and the assumptions will be revisited. The Budget Development and Fiscal Advisory are going to continue to meet through the rest of the year. In May, the governor will come out with his May revised. And then in June, at the first meeting in June, the board will be presented the preliminary budget for 2015, with the final budget being presented at the second board meeting in June for final adoption. That's it.
Great, that was incredible. Thank you very much.
That was amazing.
Great job.
So impressed.
Can you have that, can that PowerPoint get out to the board through the Super Friday update or however appropriate? Thank you very much.
That'd be great.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I would ask about LCAP, where I noticed you didn't see that on your timeline. And in terms of the budget process in general, for example, the kindergarten extended day proposal, rather than waiting till the June budget, where do you see that coming up in the budget process? In other words, what month and what process? Because the fiscal advisory committee is completely separate.
Mhm.
If you could explain that a little.
I would see the, in the budget assumptions that the board will be looking at in April, that's probably in conjunction with what was presented earlier tonight on the April deadline with the kindergarten piece, that would fit in nicely with the budget assumptions. So the budget assumptions give a guideline to the school administration or district administration to implement into the budget development. So the assumptions would include staffing, class size ratios, those types of things. So if the kindergarten program, if the expansion of the kindergarten program were included, that would be part of the assumptions, and that would be built into the budget at that time. The budget is a working document all the way through, constantly changing. So at any such time as the board makes a decision to make a change in a program, it can be implemented into the budget development process.
Okay, thank you. And also, is there any specific goals that the fiscal advisory committee has this year?
The fiscal advisory committee is looking at the district goal for the fiscal district goal, which is to look at reducing the overall costs of the district by maximizing the infrastructure that we have in place as opposed to looking at cuts, so to speak. So the district goal, I think it's number 3, is the fiscal goal, and that's the focus of the fiscal advisory committee at this point.
And their recommendations, when will they come into to the board or to the budget process?
They will likely make a recommendation to the superintendent in May.
Okay, great, thank you.
I mean, I have a question that's just going back to one of your earlier points about like part of the payments that the district is getting is from deferrals from the old funding system. Whatever happened to like the deficit money? Is that just gone?
Crickets. There's been no discussion about the deficit factor or repaying the deficit factor. Back in the day, we would get about 77 cents on the dollar that we were owed from the state, and that was what was referred to as a deficit factor. And there's been no talk about making districts whole.
Just disappeared.
Right.
You tried to put in some good news. I hadn't read about the internet funding. Is there something in there that's, I mean, it's not that much money, but there was some money there.
I don't have a lot of information on that, and from what I understand, it's a grant process. So as I can look and send out more information if I can get more specifics on the program, but I currently don't.
Yeah, no, hadn't heard there was any money for that.
Any comments from the public on this?
I just say, Lorraine, thank you so much. It was just extremely easy to follow, and it's an example of the work that you've done in this district, and OEA really is going to miss the way you're able to explain things that are complicated to most people. And I know you're going to serve your new district well, and thank you so much for the service that you provided for Orinda. Really appreciate it.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, might as well ask, what about Common Core funding? Do we still have Common Core funding, or have we spent it all, or what?
We currently have Common Core funding, but it needs to be spent by June 30th. So
Okay.
it will be spent by June 30th.
Okay, thank you. And there isn't any more anticipated for next year, right?
There isn't money that's been specifically earmarked for Common Core, but the governor is, the discretionary funds, he is recommending that districts use that to offset the cost of the implementation of Common Core. There was also money in the current fiscal year that was a pay down of past mandated cost claims that was also earmarked for that purpose. So he's not specifically earmarking money for Common Core, but recommending through the one-time discretionary money that it be used for that purpose.
Lauren, I have another sort of looking backwards and then forwards question, but when I've looked at some of the old documents of where we would have been under the old funding model, I always come to the conclusion that we as a district would have had more money if we had stayed under that model. But then when I'm looking at your slides, it makes, I mean, because there is a lot more money coming in to the state as a whole, to education, and more money for the district. So do you know if we would have gotten more money into the old level, or is it like something we don't even think about?
When we initially did the projections for districts of similar demographics, we were behind, we were losers in the local control funding formula because of the supplemental and concentration grant dollars that we're not entitled to. So what you have to do is you would have to remove the deficit factor from what we were funded at previously, and how they did the comparison was they removed the deficit factor and then applied the same COLAs going out, and we were losers under the local control funding formula.
I tried to look at just when we're at target. I think we're like the 12th lowest funded district in the state. Right, there's more money. That part's good.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
And next, we're gonna do item D, 2015-16 Budget Development Guidelines.
So as part of the annual budget development process, the board adopts budget guidelines which are used by the district administration in developing upcoming budgets. I've included the 2014-15 budget guidelines in the board packet for your reference. Last year we made a couple minor changes to the guidelines because some programs had previously been eliminated under the local control funding formula. But the guidelines that you see in the packet tonight are the 2014-15 guidelines.
Well, I mean, one question I have is, on number 8, given the change in the law, are we allowed to maintain our 9% reserve as a guideline, or do we need to change that?
Well, we can, as long as we justify, I'm sorry, I closed my computer and took that off of the screen.
Right, I
We have to make a
remember the
statement.
slide where you said
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some criteria that has to be followed. If you have above the percentage, you have to identify what the minimum reserve is. You have to identify the amount in excess, and then you have to justify the reasons, and there was a list of reasons that they.
So where do we do that?
It would probably be as part of your budget adoption for the 2015-16.
So in our actual
Mhm.
budget document,
Mhm.
not necessarily
Right.
our guidelines.
I have not seen an actual document sample of
Mhm.
that as we get
So
closer.
it's not something that you submit as a separate document to, I don't know,
Not that I
state
know
or
of.
the county or?
I think it's just that the board, and I can get clarification, but the way I read the information, it's that the board just has to declare in their presentation those 3 items.
So maybe all we have to do is make sure that, here we say in order to ensure long-term fiscal stability, but that it's consistent with the reasons that,
Mhm.
we're gonna have to state.
Right. Okay.
So I think this is the same reserve levels we had in here last year. But now this is a different year. What are our reserve levels now? Do you know offhand?
I don't, because we haven't concluded our negotiations. So what's sitting in our undesignated is money that's probably not gonna be there.
Artificially high.
Okay.
Ask that question again. And what about the site discretionary funds? I think I ask this question every year. I mean, is that
What number is
the
that?
SIP fund number 13? Are there still site discretionary funds that we should maintain that paragraph?
The board 2 years ago allocated money to the sites, which is also included in the current year budget to kind of backfill the SIP dollars that were no longer being funded. And off the top of my head, I think it's $10,000 per site for 12,000. So the board did reinstate a locally
So there are
supported
still
discretionary.
funds that would
Yes.
justify that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?